This is the inaugural episode of White People Crazy. I am your host, Michael Gowdy. Been doing comedy for more than 4 years now, and the racket's getting crazy, man. I think you have to do one of these things. Get your name out there. I have 127 followers after doing more than 4 years in this, and I was thinking about an incident that occurred just a couple of days ago that I had with some guy who I've known for years. His name, well, on the circuit, his name is, I'll just say Buckman, right? The WoW guy. He always punctuates everything with wow, hashtag wow on Twitter. I've known him for a long time. But there was an incident that happened at Mike, 2 months ago. He took quite a bit of time. He only had 10 minutes, but he kept saying at the 9-minute mark. For those of you who aren't familiar with comedy, there's something called, the light. And you can't run the light, quote unquote. But he had the light at 9 minutes. And he continued to say, this is going to be the end of this set, after this joke. And then 3 minutes later, okay, I'm really going to be done this time, you guys. And after another 3 minutes, okay, I'll close on this one. So, this is almost 20 minutes into the thing I just left, So, I thought that incident was out of my mind completely until yesterday when I performed comedy again. I saw him hosting this mic. It was at a place called the Haha Cafe. And I got up on stage and I just started getting into my act. The enthusiasm was not there. Let's just say this, for those of you who are unfamiliar with open mics, the enthusiasm is hardly ever there for anything. So I actually had a fairly good set up until that point, in terms of fairly good set. We're talking about two people laughing pretty decently. And then, my mind wandered, as you might or might not have heard from professional comics, that, and even if you've just been in the game a few years, you just riff off the top of your head what you're going to say, like stream of consciousness, usually. Well, that usually leads to some great moments on stage anyway. So I just said, last time I saw Buckman, he was, pulling, I stated what I described earlier. He was saying, I'll be done after this one, you guys. And then 3 minutes later, blah, blah, blah. You've heard the story. So all of a sudden he starts saying, no, I'm a nice guy. And he just keeps repeating that. I'm a nice guy. I said, well, even nice guys even stage hogs can be nice. So take it easy there. And later he stated that no one laughed at that. Hey, no one laughed at that. No, they were on my side. Well, one person laughed pretty hard. So, and we're talking about one out of, again, I think 5 or so people. And there, I think the rest were just sort of shocked or being respectful, which is fine. He's not, again, I wouldn't say he's a bad guy, but that incident really played on my mind. So I watched a couple of more people perform, which is standard, which you should do. If you're new to this game, watch people perform, especially if you're a rookie, get a sense of how this works, then leave. Don't stare at your fucking phone, you moron. You're not a veteran yet. You don't know how this works. You've got to learn. Anyway, so I begin to leave when I suddenly hear from behind, he says, you got a problem with me? Hey, dude, what's your problem, man? And this is, if you know Buckman, this is pretty funny. These are words he would not use. Let's just put it this way. His act is pretty not milquetoast, but let's just say standard American, good old boy, we can be friends kind of verbiage and tone. So I turn around and say, no, man, and before I can even get to my explanation, he motions for me to go outside. We go outside into the Burbank night. And he just starts, I don't want to be insulting to the guy, but almost looks, he had this very let's just call it intense expression on his face, and was using very intense body language, which kind of, well, not didn't kind of, it very much surprised me. Because I've been criticized 10 times worse than that, and, I was cool with it, and I've described recently on stage an incident that I had with Chris D'Elia in which I was not cool with anything that he was doing, and I will punch him in the face as soon as I see him next time in person. And I'm not joking about that. Anyway, back to this story. So he says, and this, I swear to God he said this, "Hey, you want to get in a contest with me? Next week I can, right here, we can go toe-to-toe, man, in a comedy contest." I said, "No, that's fine." By the way, when people usually do other people's voices, it's very much exaggeration that no one could possibly talk that way. You're thinking of that. Yeah, this is his actual voice, basically, that I'm doing now. And I said, "No, man, this has nothing to do with what I'm saying." And he just kept repeating, "I'm a nice guy. I'm a nice guy. You can ask," he started citing these other places where I go, where people manage open mics. "You can ask Marty Foster, you can ask Bob." For people who don't do comedy, this is all boring shit. So I said, "I don't want to get in a contest with you, man. Yeah, and you were nice when I first began, okay. When I began comedy, you were, you've been doing it a few years at that point, and you were, generally, pleasant, decent person, and told me how it works, blah, blah, blah. But I'm, referring to that night, it has nothing to do with your skill as a comic." He just kept challenging me. "You don't think I'm good, blah, blah, blah." No, it's not, I said, "I didn't say you weren't good, but by the way, I won't tell you what I was thinking, but I said, I didn't say you weren't good. I'm sure you do play well with, frankly, I probably think he does play well with huge crowds, of people who aren't familiar with comedy and just sort of want to be entertained for maybe, 10 to 20 minutes. He probably would play well with them. So there's that, Bugman." Jesus Christ, my allergies. If you're listening, there's that. But it gets, finally, it's just a frenetic tone of voice again. This is totally uncharacteristic of him. But he just looks at me after a while of quote-unquote arguing. It's mostly just him talking for, 2 minutes and me responding for about 5 seconds before he interrupts me again. But he just finally looks at me and says, "That hurt my feelings, man." There's something about that phrase, "hurt my feelings." It's also the way, the way he looked into my eyes and said it. There's just sort of an innocence and vulnerability. And if nothing else, I'm just a bitch to vulnerability. So I said, I said something that I thought I would never say. I said, "I'm sorry, man. Maybe should have approached you about it face to face instead of talking about it on a stage." So, I've learned my lesson from that. I'm sorry, He just kept, but he wanted to keep hassling me about it. I said, "Dude, I've got to move on to the next mic." For those of you who are unfamiliar with comedy, you go to about, you're putting in a lot of work, 2 or 3 mics per day at least, and I should say per night. And I wanted to move on to the next one. I said, "Dude, I've got to go seriously," because I've been interjecting with, "I have to move on," while he's doing this rant. So, and he still was like pulling me, trying to say more to me. Like, okay, I've got to go. So I just took off, and that's what you guys have to realize about comedy. It's not a bed of roses all the time. Most of the performances you see are well after the guy has mastered the craft and has polished his act, and it's just, streaming his material very smoothly because he's had years of experience. So it's just, there's a lot of bullshit that comes before those moments and afterward. But I think mostly before, because when you're an amateur / rookie, no one gives a fuck, and you're constantly encountering hardships. It's first world hardships, but whatever, guys. I think that's good enough for the inaugural episode. Right now I just ran solo, but I'm going to interview other people. I started out as a journalist major. I was recording interviews with other people long ass time ago, like, in college. So I was interviewing people long before these comics, and a lot of the comedian podcasts you hear are god awful, to put it frankly. The interviews, they ask a question, then they fucking interrupt, then they answer the question they just asked, then they continue to answer it while the other guy is trying to interrupt so he can answer the original question. The guest, that is. The guest is trying to answer the question that the host is answering. That's what I've discovered, at least with comedian podcast hosts. Another guy took my idea of interviewing open micers from around LA. If you want to listen to that podcast, it's called What I Hate About You. And that's hosted by a guy named Jake Cannon. I've known Jake since he began, like 2 years ago. He's okay. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say about him. He's okay. So I'll speak to you guys again soon, and I hope you weren't too bored by this. Okay, goodbye.